Second subpart B, the audit section 200 audit requirements audit required non-federal entities to expend $300,000 or $500,000 in official years ending after the December 31st, 2003, or more than in a year of the award shall have a single program-specific audit conducted for the year. In accordance with the provision of this or guidance on the determination of federal awards is provided in 205. Single audit non-federal entities that expended $300,000, $500,000 in the official year ending after the December 31st, 2003, and the more in the year of the federal award such a single audit conducted in accordance with Section 500, except for these elected the program-specific audit conducted in accordance with the paragraph C of this section. Program specification audit election auditee expands the federal awards only one of the federal programs, excluding the research and development. The federal program laws, regulations, granted agreements do not require a financial statement audit in an auditee. The auditee may elect to have a program specific conducted in accordance with Section 235. The program specific may not be elected for the research development unless all of the federal awards expanded for the received the same federal agency, and the same of the pass through the entity. The federal agency passed through the entity in the case of the subrecipient approves in advance of the specific audit. Exceptions for the federal awards expanded are less than $300,000 or $500,000 official year ending after the December 31st, 2003. Non-federal entities that suspended less than $300,000 or $500,000 fiscal year ending after December 31st, 2003, a year of the federal awards, except for the federal audit requirements for that year, except for as noted in section 215A. But records may be available for the review of audit appropriate officials as the federal agency passed through entity in the General Accounting Office. The federal funded research development centers, the FFRDC, the management of the auditee that owns and operates the federal funding research development center may elect to treat the federal funding research development center as a separate entity for the purpose of this part. The 205 for the determination of federal research for the basic. Basis 205, basis for the determination of federal awards expanded, determination of federal awards expended, determination of whether when the award is expended, and shall be based on when the activity related to the award occurs. Generally, to the activity pertains to the state events required in the non-federal entity to comply with the laws, regulations, and provisions of the contract, grants, agreements, and such expenditures, expenses, transactions associated with grants, costs, reimbursement contracts, cooperative agreements, and direct operations of disbursement of the funds passed through the subrecipients. The use of the loan proceeds under the loan and loan guarantee program, the receipt of the property, the receipt of the surplus property, the receipt of the use of the program income, the distribution and the consumption of the food commodities, and disbursement of the amounts of the entitling the fund non-federal and interest subsidized if the period of the insurance is in force. Loan and loan guarantees loans since the federal government is in risk of the loan unit and loans until the debit is repaid. The federal guidelines shall be used to calculate the value of the federal awards expended under the loan and programs, except for the noted in paragraphs 2 and C and D of this section. The value of the new loans made and received during the official year, and plus 2, the balance of the loan previous years for which the federal government imposes the continuing of the compliance requirements, plus 3, any interest subsidized cash administrative cost allowances received. Loan requirements as an institution of higher education when the loans are made to a students of an institution of higher education, but an institution does not make the loans. They only value the loans made during the year that shall be considered the federal awards expended in that year. The basic loans in the previous years are not included as federal awards expended, but because of the lender accounts of the prior balances. Prior loan and loan guaranteed loans. The loans that precede which were received and expended for the prior years are not considered federal awards extending under this part of the laws and the regulations of the provision of the contracts of the grant agreements pertaining to such loans and imposed non-continuing compliance requirements other than to repay the loans. The endowment funds, the cumulative balance of the federal awards of the endowment funds in which they are federally restricted and are considered awards expended in each year in the funds that are still restricted. Free rent. The free rent received by itself is not considered a federal award expended under this part. However, the free rent received as a part of an award to carry out the federal program shall include a determination of federal awards expended and subject to the audit under this part. The valuing of non-cash assistance. Federal non-cash assistance such as free rent, food stamps, food committees, donated property, or donated surplus property shall be valued at fair market value at the time of the receipt of the assessed value provided by the federal agency. Medicare payments are to the non-federal entity for the providing the patient care service of the Medicare eligibility individuals are not considered federal awards expended under this part. Medicaid payments to be subrecipients for the providing of the patient care services to Medicaid eligibility individuals are not considered a federal award expended under this part unless the state requires that the funds to be treated with the federal awards expended because the reimbursement is on the cost of the reimbursement basis. Certain loans provided by the National Credit Union Administration for the purpose of this part, the loans made under the National Credit Union share of the insurance funds and the central liquidated facilities that are funded in the contribution for the insured institutions are not considered federal awarded expended. 210. Subrecipient is vendor determination. Generally, an auditee may be a recipient, subrecipient of vendor awards expended, but the recipient, subrecipient would be a subject to the audit under this part. The payments received for the goods and services provided by the vendor would not be considered the federal awards. The guidance of the paragraph B and C of this section should be considered in determination whether the payments constitute a federal award of the payment for the goods and services. B. The federal award characteristic indicated the federal award received with the subrecipient are when the organization won. Determined who is eligible to receive what federal financial assistance has its performance against whether the objectives of the federal program are met, has responsibility for the problematic decision making, has responsibility for adhering to the applicable law of the federal compliance with requirements using the federal funding to carry out the program organization as compared with the providing goods and the services for a program of the pass through the entity. Payment for the goods and services characteristic indicated that the payments of goods and services received by the vendors are when the organization provides the goods and services with normal business operations. 2. Provides a similar goods with the services to many of the different purchases, operates in competitive environment, provides good services for that are actually ancillary to the operation of the federal programs. And 5 is not subject to compliance with requirements of the federal program. D. Use of judgment in making the determination whether they make an unusual circumstance exception to the list of characteristics that may in the making of the determination whether a subrecipient and the vendor relationship exists. The substances of the relationship is more than important for the form of the agreement is not expended to that all of the characteristics will be present. The judgment should be used in the determination whether it needs a subrecipient of the vendor. For profit subrecipients, this is the part that does not apply for the profit subrecipients. The pass-through entity is responsible for the establishing of the requirements as necessary to ensure the compliance for the profit subrecipients. The contract with the profit subrecipients shall be described applicable compliance requirements for the profit subrecipients, compliance and responsibility method to ensure compliance with the federal award made for the for-profit subrecipients may include pre-awarded audits, monitoring, determining the contract and post-awarded audits. Compliance responsibility for the vendors. In most cases, the auditee compliance with the responsibility for the vendor is only ensure that the procurement of the receipt of the payment for the goods and services comply with the laws, regulations, and provisions of the contract of the grant agreements, programs. Compliance with requirements normally do not pass through the vendor. However, the auditee is responsible for ensuring the compliance with the vendor transaction, which are structured such that the vendor is responsible for the program compliance of the vendor. Required records must be reviewed in determination of program compliance. Also, when these vendors' transaction relates to the major program and scope of the auditee shall include determining whether these transactions are in compliance with the laws and regulation provisions of the contract of the grant agreements. 215. The relation of the other audit requirements. Audit under this part of the lieu of the other audits. An audit made in accordance with this part of this shall be in lieu of any of the financial audit required under the individual federal awards. To the extent of the audit meets the federal agency's need, it shall rely upon use of such audits. The provisions of this part neither limit the authority of the federal agencies, include their inspector generals or the GAO to conduct the range for additional audits of the e.g. financial audits, performance audits, evaluation, inspections, or reviews. No authorizing any auditee the constraint of the federal agencies to carrying out the additional audit. Additional audits shall be planned and performed in such a way that is to build up upon the work performed on the other audits. The federal agency to put an additional audits the federal agency conducted the contract. The additional audit shall consist with other applicable laws and federal regulations arranging to the funding of the full cost of such additional audits. Request for the program to be audited is a major program. A federal agency may request an audit to have a particular federal program audited as such as a major program in lieu of the federal agency conducting and arranging for the additional audits. To allow the plan such a request should be made in at least 180 days prior to the ending of the official year that it be audited. The auditee, after the consultation within the auditor, shall properly respond to such a request, informing the federal agency whether the program would otherwise be audited as a major program using the risk-based audit approach described in Section 520. If not an estimated incremental cost, the federal agency shall then promptly confirm the auditee whether it wants to um, program audit as a major program. If the program is audited as a major program based on the federal agency request, if the federal agency agrees to pay the fulfillment incremental cost of the auditee shall have the program audited as a major program. The pass-through entity may use the provisions of this paragraph for the subrecipient. The 220, the federal frequency of audits, except for the provision of biannual audits that provided in paragraph A and B of this section. Audits required for this part shall be performed annually or biannual. Audited shall cover the both years within the biennial period. The state of the local government that is required for the Constitution and statute in effect of January 1st, 1987 to undergo in its audits less frequently than annually is permitted to undergo its audit pursuant to this part. Biannually, the IRS requirement must still be in effective of the biannual under the audit. Any profit organization that their biennial audits for the biennial periods ending in the period between the July 1st, 1992, and January 1st, 1995 is permitted to undergo its audit pursuant to the part of the biennial. 225 the sanctions. No audit costs of the AB charge of the federal awarded that the audit required for this part has not been made, that they have been made, but in accordance with this part, in case of the continued inability, unwillingness to have an audit conducted in accordance with this part, the federal agencies as pass-through entities shall take and part appropriate action using the sanctions such as withholding percentage of the federal award until the audit is completed satisfactory. B. Withholding, disallowing overhead of the cost of suspending federal awards until the audit is conducted or terminating the federal award. 3. 230 audit costs. The allowable costs of the user, unless prohibited by law, the cost of audits that may be in accordance with the provision of this part are allowable to charges of the federal awards. The charge may be considered directly cost or allocated indirect costs is determined in accordance with the provision of the applicable off the management budget cost principle circular. The Federal Acquisition Regulation of 48 Code Federal Regulation Part 30 and 31 for the applicable costs of principle of regulations. The unallowable costs of non-federal entity shall not be charged for the following sub-federal award. The cost of any audit under the Single Audit Act amendments of the 1996 31 U.S. Standard Code 7501 at 10 sequence not conducted in accordance with this part. The cost of auditing a non-federal entity with the federal awards expended for the less than $300,000, $500,000 for fiscal year ending after December 31st, 2003 per year is thereby expected under the Section 2OD of the having audited conducted under this part. However, this does not prohibit the pass-through entity from the charging of the federal awards for the cost of the limited scope of the audits for the monitoring the subrecipients in accordance with Section 400D3 of the circular, provided the subrecipients does not include a single audit for the purpose of the part. The limited scope of audits only includes the agreed upon procedures or engagements conducted in accordance with either the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants generally accepted auditing standards, assessing standards. They are paid for the arrangement and passing through the entity and address only one more of the following type of the compliance requirements: activities allowed, unallowed, allowable, and cost principles, eligibility, matching, level of effort, earmarking, and reporting. 235 program-specific audit. Program-specific audit guide is available. In many cases, the program-specific audit guide will be available to provide the specific guidance to the auditor with respect to the internal control compliance with requirements. When it is suggested audited procedures of audited reporting requirements, the auditor should contact the Office of Inspector General of the federal agency to determine whether this guide is available with the current program-specific audit. As guide is available for the auditor shall have the following: government accounting, government applicable standards. The guide will perform the program-specific audit. The program-specific audit guide not available. When a program-specific audit guide is not available to the auditee, and the auditor shall have basically the same responsibility of the federal program as they would have for the audit of the major program in the single audit. The auditee shall prepare the financial statement for the federal program that includes at a minimum and schedule of the expenditures of the federal awards of the program. Notes of the described significant accounting policies used in preparing the schedule and summary schedules of the prior auditing findings consistent with the requirements of Section 315B and in corrective action planning consistent with the requirements of 315C. The auditor shall, 1, perform an audit of the financial statement of the federal program in accordance with the government accounting, accounting standards, obtaining and understanding internal control of the performing the test internal control over the federal program consistent with the requirements of Section 500C of this program for the major program. 3. The perform the procedures to determine whether the auditee has complied with the law, regulation, provisions of the contract of the grant agreements which have direct material effect of the federal program consistent with the requirements of Section 500D for the major program, and follow up on prior audited findings and perform the procedures to asset the responsibility of summary schedule of the prior audited findings prepared for the auditee report as a current year of audit finding. When the auditor concludes that the summary schedule of the prior auditing findings material misrepresents the status of any of the prior audited finding in accordance with the requirements of Section 502, 500E, the auditor's reports may be in the form of either the combined and separated reports may be organized directly from the manner presented in the section of the auditor report shall be stated that the audit was conducted in accordance with this part, including the following. 1. As an opinion of the disclaimer of an opinion as whether the financial statement of the federal program is presented fairly in all material respects in conformity with the state of accounting policies. Report of the internal control related to the federal program, which describe the scope of the testing and the internal control and the results of the test. 3. The report of the compliance, which includes the opinion, the disclaimer of the opinion as to whether the auditee was complied with the laws, regulations, provisions of the contract, the grant agreements, which have direct and immaterial effect of the federal programs, and 4. As the scheduled findings of the question cost for the federal program that includes the summary of the auditor's results related to the federal program in format consistent with the Section 500D1 and findings of the question cost consistent with the requirements of Section 500D3. C. The report of submission of the program-specific audit. 1. The audit shall be completed with the reporting required for the paragraphs C2 and C3 of the section submitted for the earlier and 30 days after the recipient of the auditor's report of the 9 months after the end of the audit period, unless a long period is agreed for to advance in the federal agency that provided that the funding or a different period is specified in a program-specific audit guide. However, for the official year beginning on and before the June 30th, 1998, the audit shall be completed with the required reporting shall be submitted on the early 30 days after the recipient of the auditor's report, 13 months after the end of the audit, unless the different period is specified in the program-specific audit guide. Unless restricted by the law regulations, the auditor shall make the report or copies available for the public inspection. When the program-specific audit guides is available for the auditee, shall submit the Federal Clearinghouse designation of the Office Management budget for the data collection for the prepaid in accordance with Section 320 B of this circular was as applicable to the program-specific audit, with reporting required by the program-specific audit guide to be retained for the archive or copy. Also, the auditee shall submit to federal awarding agencies passed through the entities and reporting required for the program-specific audited guide. When a program-specific audit guide is not available, the reporting package of the program-specific audit shall consist of the financial statement for the federal program, the summary schedule for the prior audit findings, corrective action planning as described in paragraph B2 of this section of the auditor's report described in paragraph B2 of this section. The data collection of the prepaid in accordance with the 321 applicable to perform to program-specific audit, and 1 copy of the reporting of the package shall be submitted to the Federal Clearinghouse designated for the Office Management budget to be retained as an archival copy. Also, when the schedule of the findings of the question cost of the disclosed audit findings of the summary schedule for the prior audit findings and reported to the status of the auditing findings of the auditee shall submit one of the copy of the reporting packages to Federal Clearinghouse on the behalf of the federal awarding agencies directly on the pass-through the entities in the case of the subrecipient instead of the subrecipient for the reporting package to the pass-through the entity with the subrecipient is not required for it to be submitted reporting package to the pass through the entity, and the subrecipient shall provide with a written notification to the pass through the entity consistent with the requirements of Section 322E. As the subrecipient may be submitted with a copy of the reporting package of the pass through entity to comply with the notification requirement. Other sections of this part may apply the program-specific audit and as are subject to 100, 215, 220, 230, 300, 305, 315, 320, 320J, 400, 405, 510, 515 of the circular and other reference provisions of the part unless contrary to the provisions of other sections of program-specific audit guide in the program laws and regulations. Subpart C. Auditees.